Owner has no idea why hot dogs don't sell, so he goes undercover and finds sausages stored with Rodent. Frank Mitchell had owned Frank's Famous Franks for 23 years, and in all that time, he'd never seen anything like this. He sat alone in his cramped back office, the yellow glow of his desk lamp casting shadows across rows of numbers that made his stomach turn. Outside, the evening crowd that used to line up 6 deep at the counter had dwindled to a trickle. Through the thin walls, he could hear the faint sizzle of the griddle and Carla's voice taking an order, but the usual dinner rush energy was gone. 2 weeks ago, everything was fine, he thought, rubbing his temples. What the hell happened? The sales report in front of him told a brutal story. Revenue had dropped 60%. 60. In 14 days. It wasn't a slow decline, it was a cliff. Frank pulled up the online review page on his laptop, even though he'd already read every single comment twice. The newer ones made his chest tighten. Never again. Just. Never, posted 3 days ago. Something felt off. Can't explain it but won't be back. Posted 5 days ago. Disgusting experience. Management should be ashamed. Posted 1 week ago. None of them explained what was wrong. No complaints about taste, or service, or price. Just vague disgust and horror. Like they knew something he didn't. He tried asking his staff. Carla, his assistant manager of 8 years, had shrugged and said maybe it was the weather. Leo, the night shift manager, had blamed a competitor opening up across town, except there was no competitor. Even the line cooks seemed confused, insisting everything was the same as always. But customers didn't lie. Not like this. Not in these numbers. Frank clicked through his security camera footage from the past week, watching grainy clips of customers approaching the counter, ordering, taking their food. And then, sometimes, their expressions would change. A subtle grimace. A quick glance at their hot dog. One woman had actually thrown hers in the trash after a single bite and walked away without a word. What are they seeing that I'm not? He stood up and paced the tiny office, his mind racing. 23 years of reputation, built one hot dog at a time, was evaporating before his eyes. His savings account could cover maybe 2 more months of this before he'd have to consider closing. The thought made him nauseous. Frank walked out into the main area. It was 8:47 p.m. on a Friday, prime time. There should have been a line out the door. Instead, 4 customers sat scattered at the outdoor tables, and 2 were on their phones, barely touching their food. Carla looked up from wiping down the counter. "You okay, boss? You look exhausted." "Just thinking," Frank said, forcing a smile. "Don't worry too much. Business always has its ups and downs, right?" Frank wanted to believe her. But Carla didn't see the numbers. She didn't know they were drowning. He walked toward the kitchen, watching his 2 evening cooks, Miguel and Danny, work the griddle. They moved with practiced efficiency, the same way they had for years. The buns were toasted perfectly. The onions caramelized just right. Everything looked normal. But something was wrong. Deep in his gut, Frank knew it. He was about to head back to his office when he noticed Leo emerging from the storage room in the back, pulling the door shut quickly behind him. Leo was a newer hire, only 6 months on the job, but he'd come with good references and had been reliable. Mostly. "Hey, Leo!" Frank called out. Leo flinched, then turned with a tight smile. "Oh, hey, Frank. Didn't see you there. Everything good with inventory?" Yeah, all stocked up. "Actually, the storage room's getting a little cramped. Might need some reorganizing soon. Mind if I take a look?" Leo stepped in front of the door, casual but deliberate. "Honestly, it's kind of a mess right now. I was gonna clean it up this weekend. Don't want you to see it like that." He laughed, but it sounded forced. Frank studied him for a moment. "All right. Let me know if you need help." "Will do, boss." Leo walked away quickly, disappearing into the front area. Frank stared at the storage room door. In 23 years, no employee had ever told him he couldn't go into his own storage room. He reached for the handle, but then stopped himself. If something was wrong, if someone was hiding something, confronting them now would only make them cover their tracks. He needed proof. Back in his office, Frank sat down and opened his laptop again. He pulled up the reviews one more time, reading between the lines. Disgusting experience. Something felt off. Never again. These weren't complaints about service or pricing. These were warnings. Then he noticed something he'd missed before. 3 of the most recent negative reviews mentioned the smell. Not the food itself, but something in the air. Something faint but wrong. Frank's mind flashed back to the storage room. Leo's nervous energy. The way he blocked the door. A terrible suspicion began to form. He closed his laptop and made a decision. If his employees were hiding something, asking them directly wouldn't work. They'd lie, or cover for each other, or worse, destroy evidence. No. If he wanted the truth, he'd have to find it himself. And that meant going undercover in his own business. Frank pulled out his phone and opened a local temp agency website. His hands shook slightly as he created a new profile under a fake name, Hank Brennan. Available for part-time janitorial work. Immediate start. Within 20 minutes, he'd submitted an application to 3 agencies in town, including one he knew Carla sometimes used for extra cleaning help. He leaned back in his chair, heart pounding. 23 years of trust, about to be tested. But if something was rotting in his business, literally or figuratively, he'd find it. Even if it meant becoming a stranger in his own hot dog stand. Frank stood in front of his bathroom mirror at 5:30 a.m., barely recognizing himself. The fake beard, ordered overnight from a costume shop, itched against his jaw. He'd chosen salt and pepper gray, different from his own dark brown. Thick-rimmed glasses that weren't his prescription sat crooked on his nose, making everything slightly blurry. A floppy canvas hat covered most of his hair, and he'd dressed in clothes he never wore, a faded gray hoodie and worn jeans with paint stains. Hank Brennan, he said to his reflection, testing the name. His voice sounded the same, so he dropped it half an octave and added a slight rasp. Name's Hank. His phone buzzed. The temp agency had responded at midnight. Carla needed a part-time cleaner starting today. Could Hank be there by 6 p.m.? Perfect. Frank spent the day away from the shack, letting Carla run the morning and afternoon shifts alone. He parked 3 blocks away at 5:45 p.m., his heart hammering as he walked toward his own business like a stranger. The evening crowd was thin again. Through the window, he could see maybe 6 customers total. Carla stood behind the register, looking tired. Frank pushed open the door. The bell chimed, the same bell he'd installed 15 years ago, and Carla looked up with a professional smile. Hi there! What can I get you? Actually, Frank said in his lower, raspier voice, I'm Hank. From the temp agency? Hear about the cleaning position. Carla's face brightened. Oh, thank God, yes! Come on back. She didn't recognize him. Not even a flicker. Frank followed her past the counter, his counter, and into the back area. Miguel was working the griddle, and he glanced up briefly, nodded at Frank, then returned to the sausages. No recognition there either. So the job's pretty straightforward, Carla explained, grabbing a clipboard. Evening shift, 6 to midnight. Mostly sweeping, mopping, taking out trash, wiping down surfaces. The day crew does the deep cleaning, but nights get messy with the dinner rush. She paused. Well, what used to be the dinner rush? Business slow? Frank asked carefully. Carla sighed. You have no idea. 2 weeks ago this place was packed. Now, she gestured at the empty dining area. I don't get it. Frank, that's the owner. He's tearing his hair out trying to figure out what happened. Frank nodded sympathetically. Maybe the food? That's the thing, nothing changed. Same recipes, same suppliers, same everything. She lowered her voice. Between you and me, I think it's just bad luck. These things happen. But Frank could hear the doubt in her voice. She didn't believe that either. When do I start? Frank asked. Right now, if you're ready. Let me show you where we keep supplies. The next 3 hours passed in surreal discomfort. Frank mopped floors he'd mopped 1,000 times, emptied trash cans he'd emptied for 2 decades, and watched his own business operate without him. The fake beard made his face sweat. The glasses kept sliding down his nose. But nobody questioned. Hank the cleaner. Around 9 p.m., the last customer left. Miguel and Danny finished their shift and headed out, waving goodbye to Carla. That's when Leo arrived for the night shift, walking in through the back door with his usual confident stride. Hey Carla! Slow night again? Dead? She said flatly. This is Hank, new cleaner. Leo barely glanced at Frank. Cool. Hey, I'm gonna do inventory check real quick. He headed straight for the storage room. Frank, pretending to organize cleaning supplies, watched from the corner of his eye. Leo pulled out a key, unlocked the storage room door, and slipped inside. The door clicked shut behind him. Carla was in the front, counting the register. Frank quietly moved closer to the storage room, straining to hear. Shuffling. Boxes moving. Then, was that a scratching sound? The door suddenly swung open. Leo stepped out, nearly colliding with Frank. Whoa! Dude, personal space, Leo said, irritated. Sorry, just mopping, Frank mumbled, gesturing vaguely at the floor. Leo studied him for a moment, eyes narrowed. Then his expression relaxed. Yeah, whatever. Hey, storage room's off limits to cleaning crew, okay? We've got an organization system. Don't want it messed up. Sure, no problem. Leo walked past him toward the front. Frank stared at the storage room door, his suspicion crystallizing into certainty. He's hiding something in there. At 11:30 p.m., Carla called it a night. Hank, can you finish up and lock the back door when you leave? Leo's got the front. No problem, Frank said. She grabbed her purse and left. Through the window to the front area, Frank could see Leo on his phone, sitting at the counter. This was his chance. Frank reached into his pocket, fingers closing around his spare key to the storage room, the master key Leo didn't know existed. His hands trembled as he approached the door. Whatever was behind it had destroyed his business in 2 weeks. Now he was about to find out why. Frank's hand hovered over the storage room doorknob, his master key pinched between sweating fingers. Through the wall, he could hear Leo's voice in the front area, talking to someone on the phone. Yeah, should be fine. Nobody's gonna check. Frank's pulse hammered in his ears. He slid the key into the lock, twisted slowly. The mechanism gave a soft click that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet hallway. He froze, listening. Leo's conversation continued, oblivious. Frank pushed the door open just wide enough to slip inside, then eased it shut behind him. The storage room was dark except for a sliver of light from the crack under the door. He fumbled for his phone, turning on the flashlight. The beams swept across familiar shelves, industrial cans of condiments, boxes of buns, restaurant supplies. Everything looked normal at first. But then the smell hit him. It wasn't the usual storage room mustiness. This was something else. Something organic and wrong. Spoiled meat mixed with ammonia and decay. Frank covered his nose and moved deeper into the room. His light landed on the refrigerated section where they kept the sausages. 3 large plastic crates were stacked against the back wall, labeled with dates from last week. That's when he heard it. Scratch. 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 The sound came from behind the crates. Rhythmic. Deliberate. Something small moving with quick, jerky motions. Frank's stomach dropped. He stepped closer, angling his phone's light toward the sound. A shadow darted across the top of the crates. Too fast to see clearly, but Frank's brain filled in what his eyes couldn't quite catch: a long tail, small body, gray-brown fur. No. No, no, no. He rushed forward, yanking the top crate toward him. It was lighter than it should have been, half empty. The sausages inside looked wrong, their casings slightly deflated, with tiny puncture marks dotting the surface. Something had been feeding on them. Frank pulled the second crate. More of the same. The third crate was even worse. Several sausages were torn open, their contents partially eaten. His hands shook as he pulled out his phone to take photos. The flash illuminated the carnage, contaminated meat, droppings scattered across the bottom of the crates, and in the corner, a nest. Shredded cardboard, bits of food wrappers, and what looked like insulation material, all woven together into a small mound. Fresh droppings surrounded it. Frank's chest tightened. This wasn't a random mouse that wandered in yesterday. This was an infestation. Days, maybe weeks old. And Leo had known. That's why he'd been blocking access. That's why he kept saying the storage room was under maintenance. He'd been covering up a health violation that could shut them down permanently. Frank snapped photo after photo, his anger building with each click. 23 years of reputation, destroyed because one negligent manager couldn't be bothered to. The door handle rattled. Frank's blood turned to ice. "Hello? Someone in there?" Carla's voice. "I thought I heard something." She came back. Frank killed his phone's flashlight, plunging the room into darkness. His mind raced. If Carla found him here, the whole undercover operation was blown. He'd have no proof of Leo's involvement, no way to know how deep this went. The handle turned. Light spilled in from the hallway. Frank dove behind a tall shelf unit stacked with industrial-sized ketchup containers, squeezing himself into the narrow gap between the shelf and the wall. His fake beard caught on something metal, yanking painfully at his jaw, but he bit down on a gasp. "That's weird," Carla muttered, stepping inside. "I locked this." Her footsteps moved through the room. Frank pressed himself flatter against the wall, praying she wouldn't notice the disturbed crates. "Leo? You in here?" Silence. Then, from somewhere near the nest, that same scratching sound. Carla gasped. "Oh my God!" Her footsteps rushed toward the crates. Frank heard her breathing quicken, imagined her seeing what he'd just seen. "Leo!" she shouted toward the front. "Leo, get back here right now!" Footsteps pounded down the hallway. Leo appeared in the doorway. "What? What's wrong? Are you kidding me right now?" Carla's voice climbed higher. "How long has this been going on? What are you talking about?" "The rats, Leo! The storage room is infested with rats." A pause. When Leo spoke again, his voice was carefully neutral. "Oh. Yeah, I was gonna handle that this weekend. It's not a big deal." "Not a big deal?" Carla practically screamed. "We've been serving food stored with rodents. Do you have any idea what the health department would do to us?" "Look, I didn't want to worry Frank, okay? He's already stressed about sales. I was gonna call an exterminator." "When? After we poison half the town?" Their argument continued, but Frank barely heard it. His mind was spinning. Carla didn't know. She'd been innocent this whole time. The surprise in her voice was genuine. It was just Leo. But why would Leo hide this instead of reporting it immediately? Unless he had something else to hide. Frank carefully pulled his phone back out, checking the photos he'd taken. Clear evidence of contamination. But not enough to prove Leo's intentional cover-up. He needed more. As Carla and Leo's argument moved back toward the front, Frank waited in the darkness, his jaw clenched beneath the itchy fake beard. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Frank didn't sleep that night. He sat in his living room until 4 a.m., scrolling through the photos on his phone. Contaminated sausages. Rodent droppings. That nest of shredded material. Each image made his stomach churn harder. But one question kept circling his mind: how many people got sick? The reviews had been vague, disgusted, horrified, but nobody had explicitly mentioned finding rodent evidence in their food. Which meant either they hadn't noticed, or they'd been too embarrassed to say. Frank needed to talk to actual customers. Real people who'd eaten at his shack recently, and never came back. The problem was, he couldn't do it as himself. Word would spread too fast in a small town. But as Hank the cleaner? A concerned worker asking around? That might work. At 10 a.m., Frank donned his disguise again and drove to Riverside Park, a local spot 3 blocks from his shack where families often brought takeout food. It was Saturday, and the park was busy with kids on the playground and couples walking dogs. Frank bought a coffee from a cart vendor and sat on a bench, watching. After 20 minutes, he spotted a familiar face, Marcus Webb, a regular customer who used to come in every Friday with his wife and 2 kids. Used to. Frank hadn't seen the Webb family in over a week. They were at a picnic table now, eating sandwiches from the deli across town. The kids, maybe 7 and 9 years old, were laughing, kicking their feet. Everything looked normal. Frank stood up, rehearsing his approach, and walked over casually. "Excuse me," he said in his raspy Hank voice. "Sorry to bother you folks. I work at Frank's Famous Frank's down the street, and we're trying to figure out why business has dropped. You used to come in a lot, right? Mind if I ask what changed?" Marcus looked up, his expression immediately darkening. His wife, Jennifer, stopped mid-bite. "You work there?" Marcus said carefully. "Yeah, just started. Cleaning crew. But the owner's really worried, and we're never going back." Jennifer interrupted, her voice tight. "Ever?" Frank's chest tightened. "Can I ask why?" Marcus glanced at his kids, then lowered his voice. 2 Fridays ago, we got hot dogs like always. Everything seemed fine until... He hesitated. Until Ethan, our youngest, bit into his sausage and spit it out. Said it tasted funny, not bad, just... off. Weird texture. We thought maybe it was undercooked. Jennifer added. But when I looked at it closer, there were these tiny holes. Like something had been chewing on it. Frank's blood ran cold. We threw everything away and left. Marcus continued. Didn't make a scene because we figured it was just a bad batch. But then Ethan got sick that night. Stomach cramps, vomiting. We took him to urgent care. The doctor said it could have been food poisoning. Jennifer said, her voice shaking slightly. We didn't report it because we couldn't prove anything, and Ethan recovered after a day. But we're never taking that risk again. Frank felt like the ground was tilting beneath him. I'm so sorry. Did you tell the owner? We left a review online, Marcus said. Figured that was enough of a warning to others. Disgusting experience, that had been their review. Now Frank understood. Thank you for telling me, Frank said quietly. I'll make sure management knows. As he walked away, his hands were shaking so badly he had to shove them in his pockets. A child had gotten sick. Sick enough for urgent care. This wasn't just about lost revenue anymore. This was about people's health. Their safety. Their trust. Frank forced himself to keep moving through the park, looking for other former customers. Near the fountain, he spotted an elderly woman sitting alone with a book, Mrs. Chin, another regular who always ordered the chili dog special. He approached carefully. Mrs. Chin? I'm Hank, I work at. I know who you are, she said without looking up. Or rather, where you work. Have you been by recently? She finally looked at him, her expression cold. I stopped going 2 weeks ago after I saw something behind your counter. Frank's heart stopped. What did you see? Mrs. Chin pulled out her phone, scrolled for a moment, then turned the screen toward him. The photo was blurry, taken from outside the front window at an odd angle. But in the background, barely visible near the storage room door, was a gray shape moving across the floor. Small body. Long tail. I wasn't sure at first, Mrs. Chin said. Thought maybe my eyes were playing tricks. But then I zoomed in at home. She swiped to another photo, the same image, enlarged and grainy. The shape was unmistakable. A rat, caught mid-scurry across Frank's kitchen floor. I didn't want to embarrass anyone, she continued, so I just stopped coming. But I told my friends. They told their friends. Word spreads fast in a town this size. Frank stared at the photo, his vision blurring. That's how the news had spread. Not through official complaints or health inspectors, but through whispered warnings and shared photos. A silent alarm that had emptied his restaurant in days. "Thank you for showing me," Frank managed. Mrs. Chen studied him. "You seem upset." "I am." "Then do something about it." She closed her book and walked away, leaving Frank standing alone by the fountain. He looked down at his phone, at the photos from last night. Then at Mrs. Chen's blurry image still burned into his mind. Leo hadn't just hidden an infestation. He'd let it spread into the main kitchen. And Frank was going to prove it. Frank returned to the shack that evening with a new phone, a cheap burner with a decent camera, tucked into his jacket pocket. If he was going to catch Leo in the act, he needed evidence that couldn't be traced back to his personal device. "Hey Hank!" Carla greeted him when he arrived at 6 p.m. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes. "Listen, about last night. I'm sorry you had to hear all that. Leo swears he called an exterminator this morning. Did he?" Frank asked in his raspy Hank voice. Carla hesitated. "He showed me a confirmation number." "So? Yeah, I guess." But she didn't sound convinced. "When does the exterminator come?" Frank pressed. "Monday," he said. 2 days from now." She sighed. "Frank, the owner, doesn't even know yet. Leo begged me not to tell him until after it's handled. Said Frank's already stressed enough." Frank's jaw tightened under the fake beard. "Leo's buying time." "What do you think?" he asked. Carla looked around to make sure they were alone. "Honestly? Something feels wrong. Leo's been acting weird for weeks. Defensive. Secretive. And now this?" She shook her head. "I don't know. Maybe I'm paranoid." "Trust your gut," Frank said. She gave him a small, sad smile. "Yeah. Maybe I should." The evening shift crawled by. Frank mopped, wiped tables, emptied trash, all while keeping one eye on the storage room. Leo arrived at 9 p.m., right on schedule, barely acknowledging Frank as he headed to the back. "Gonna do inventory," Leo called to Carla. Same excuse as always. Frank positioned himself near the hallway, pretending to organize cleaning supplies on a cart. From this angle, he had a clear view of the storage room door. Leo disappeared inside. The door clicked shut. Frank waited 30 seconds, then quietly moved closer. The storage room had a small ventilation grate near the ceiling, installed years ago for airflow, positioned at eye level from the hallway. Frank had never paid much attention to it before, but now. He positioned himself on his toes, peering through the metal slats. Inside, Leo stood with his back turned, holding a clipboard. But he wasn't checking inventory. Instead, he was moving boxes around haphazardly, shoving older containers toward the back and pulling newer ones forward. Then Frank saw it. Leo grabbed a sausage crate marked with last week's date, one of the contaminated ones, and dumped its contents into a fresh crate labeled with today's date. Frank's breath caught in his throat. Leo wasn't just hiding the infestation. He was redistributing contaminated meat into new containers to make it look fresh. The burner phone was in Frank's hand before he consciously decided to move. He angled it carefully through the ventilation grate, hit record, and captured 15 seconds of Leo's deliberate contamination. Then, from somewhere deep in the storage room, came that familiar scratching sound. Leo glanced toward the back corner, irritated. "Not now," he muttered. He walked toward the sound, out of Frank's view. There was shuffling, a soft thump, then Leo's voice again. Yeah, I know you're hungry." Frank's blood turned to ice. Was Leo talking to the rats? He adjusted his angle, trying to see deeper into the room. Through the grate, he caught a glimpse of Leo crouching near the nest area, holding something in his hand. A sausage. Leo tore it in half and tossed both pieces toward the corner. 2 small gray shapes scurried forward, fighting over the meat. Leo was feeding them. Frank's hands shook so badly he almost dropped the phone. He kept recording, capturing Leo standing there, watching the rats eat like they were pets. "There you go," Leo said quietly. "That'll keep you busy." He stood up, brushed off his hands, and turned back toward the door. Frank barely managed to pocket his phone and scramble backward before Leo emerged. He grabbed a mop, pretending to clean an already clean section of floor. Leo locked the storage room behind him, then noticed Frank. His eyes narrowed. "You're still here?" "Just finishing up the back hallway," Frank said, keeping his voice steady. Leo studied him for a long moment. "You know, Hank, you're real thorough. Almost too thorough. Just doing my job." "Right," Leo stepped closer. "But here's the thing, cleaners clean. They don't snoop. They don't ask questions. They definitely don't hang around the storage room like they're waiting for something." Frank's heart hammered, but he kept his expression neutral. "I wasn't. I'm watching you," Leo interrupted, his voice dropping. "So whatever you think you're doing, stop. Because temp workers are easy to replace. Understand?" Frank nodded slowly. "Understood." Leo held his gaze for another beat, then walked away toward the front. Frank waited until he was gone, then pulled out his phone and watched the footage again. Clear video of Leo contaminating fresh inventory. Clear video of Leo feeding rats. But it still didn't answer the biggest question: why? Why would someone deliberately maintain an infestation? Why feed the rats instead of calling pest control immediately? What was Leo getting out of this? Frank's mind raced through possibilities, but nothing made sense. Unless the infestation itself wasn't the crime. It was a cover for something else. Frank pocketed his phone and made a decision. He needed to search that storage room properly, every corner, every shelf, every hidden space. Because whatever Leo was really hiding, it was worse than rodents. Sunday morning, Frank sat in his car across the street from the shack, watching through binoculars as an exterminator's van pulled up to the back entrance. So Leo actually called them. A man in coveralls emerged carrying equipment, traps, spray cans, inspection tools. Leo met him at the door, and they disappeared inside together. Frank's phone buzzed. A text from Carla. "Exterminator here. Leo says we're closed today for treatment. Tomorrow should be fine." Frank typed back with his regular phone. "Good. Keep me posted." But something nagged at him. If Leo was seriously trying to fix the problem, why had he waited so long? Why contaminate fresh inventory just last night if he knew pest control was coming today? Unless he's just putting on a show. Frank waited 2 hours until the exterminator left. He watched the van drive away, then checked his watch. Sunday afternoon, Leo's day off. The shack would be empty until Monday evening. This was his chance. Frank drove home, grabbed his master keys, and returned at 4 p.m. when the street was quiet. He entered through the back door, his real identity restored, no need for the disguise in his own building. The storage room still smelled like chemicals from the treatment. Fresh traps lined the walls, and the contaminated crates had been removed. On the surface, everything looked handled. But Frank wasn't buying it. He began a systematic search, pulling boxes away from walls, checking behind shelves, examining every corner. The nest was gone, the droppings cleaned up. The exterminator had been thorough. So what was Leo still protecting? Frank moved to the upper shelves, standing on a stepladder to check areas that hadn't been disturbed in months. Industrial supplies, old equipment, forgotten inventory, nothing suspicious. Then his hand brushed against something wedged behind a stack of receipt boxes on the top shelf. A notebook. Frank pulled it down, his heart quickening. It was a cheap spiral-bound notebook, the kind sold at dollar stores. The cover was blank. He opened it. Page after page of handwritten notes in Leo's scratchy handwriting. Week 1 storage temp raised to 48 degrees Fahrenheit. Noticed first signs. Week 2 moved fresh inventory to compromise section. Sales unchanged. Week 3 customer complaints starting. Good. Week 4 revenue down 35%. Boss stressed. Better than expected. Frank's hands trembled as he flipped through more pages. Each entry was dated, clinical, deliberate. This wasn't negligence. It was sabotage. The final entry, dated 3 days ago. Boss getting desperate. Sales down 60%. Should trigger sale consideration within 2 weeks. Stay the course. Peterson will pay full amount once closure announced. Frank read the last line 3 times, his mind reeling. Peterson. Derek Peterson, the real estate developer who'd been trying to buy Frank's property for 2 years. The shack sat on prime corner real estate in the middle of downtown. Peterson had made offer after offer, each one rejected. The land's worth 10 times what the business is, Peterson had said during their last meeting. Sell now, retire rich. But Frank had refused. This shack was his life. So Peterson had found another way. He'd planted Leo. Paid him to destroy the business from the inside. And once Frank was desperate enough, once bankruptcy loomed, he'd have no choice but to sell at whatever price Peterson offered. Frank's vision blurred with rage. He pulled out his phone and photographed every page of the notebook, his hands shaking so badly he had to brace against the shelf. 23 years. 23 years of early mornings and late nights, of perfecting recipes and serving his community, and it was all almost stolen by a planted saboteur and a greedy developer. He was about to climb down when his phone rang. Carla. Frank? Are you sitting down? His stomach dropped. What's wrong? I just got a call from City Hall. There's been an anonymous complaint filed against us. The health inspector is coming Tuesday morning. That's 48 hours from now. Frank's blood ran cold. Who filed it? They wouldn't say. Anonymous tips are protected. She sounded panicked. Frank, if they find anything wrong after what just happened with the rats, they'll shut us down. Permanently. Peterson. It had to be. Push Frank to the edge, then make sure the health department delivered the final blow. We'll be ready, Frank said, forcing confidence into his voice. The exterminator already treated everything. We'll pass. I hope so. Carla's voice cracked. I can't lose this job, Frank. I've got 2 kids. You won't. I promise. After she hung up, Frank stood alone in the storage room, gripping Leo's notebook like a weapon. 48 hours. Leo would be back tomorrow evening for his Monday's shift. He'd expect everything to be fine, the infestation handled, Frank still clueless, the plan still on track. But Frank knew everything now. The sabotage, the developer, the anonymous health complaint, time to finish the job. He looked at the hidden camera he'd installed last night, a tiny device stuck behind a ceiling vent, still recording. One more shift. That's all he needed. One more shift to catch Leo completing his sabotage, confirming his conspiracy with Peterson, sealing his own fate. And then Frank would spring the trap. He climbed down from the ladder, pocketed the notebook, and headed for the door. 48 hours until the health inspector. 24 hours until Leo's final shift. Time to end this. Monday evening, Frank sat in his car parked in the alley behind the shack, watching the feed from his hidden camera on a tablet. Inside, Leo had arrived 10 minutes early for his shift, unusual for him. Through the camera, Frank watched Leo enter the storage room and look around carefully, checking the traps the exterminator had set. All empty. The infestation appeared handled. But Leo didn't look relieved. He looked annoyed. Frank's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Status update? Frank watched through the camera as Leo pulled out his phone, read the message, and typed back. Clean. Inspector tomorrow will find nothing. Need plan B. The response came seconds later. Already handled. Filed complaint about expired permits. They'll find something. Finish it tonight. Leo typed, understood. Frank's jaw clenched. Peterson wasn't leaving anything to chance. Inside the storage room, Leo pulled out a plastic bag from his jacket. Frank zoomed in on the camera feed, his breath catching. Leo was removing small packages from the bag, raw meat, already decomposing, wrapped in butcher paper. He was going to recontaminate the storage room. Frank had seen enough. He grabbed the burner phone with all the video evidence, pocketed the notebook, and sent a quick text to Carla. Come to the shack. Emergency. Tell Miguel and Danny too. Don't tell Leo. Then he put on his disguise one final time. Frank entered through the front door as Hank, just as Leo emerged from the storage room. Leo's face went pale when he saw him. What are you doing here? Your shift doesn't start until 8-inch. Boss wanted the floors stripped and waxed tonight, Frank said casually. Special job before the health inspector. Leo's eyes narrowed. Nobody told me about that. Must have slipped through. Frank moved toward the supply closet. I'll stay out of your way. For the next 20 minutes, Frank pretended to prepare the floor stripping equipment, while keeping Leo in his peripheral vision. Leo kept glancing at his phone, then at the storage room, clearly anxious. At 7:45, Carla arrived through the back door, followed by Miguel and Danny. All three looked confused. Frank texted us? Carla said. What's the emergency? Leo spun around. Frank's not even here. Actually, Frank said, standing up from where he'd been crouched by the supply closet. I am. He reached up and pulled off the fake beard, then removed the glasses and hat. The silence in the room was deafening. Carla's mouth fell open. Frank? You've been Hank this whole time? Miguel laughed nervously. No way. That's insane. But Leo wasn't laughing. His face had gone from pale to gray, his eyes darting toward the exit. Don't even think about it, Frank said quietly. Danny, lock the front door. Miguel, block the back. Both men moved immediately, confused but trusting. What's going on? Carla asked, her voice rising. Frank, what is this? Frank pulled out the notebook and held it up. This is Leo's plan to destroy my business so a real estate developer could buy the property cheap. Leo's hands balled into fists. That's not, you can't prove. Week 1. Frank read aloud. Storage temp raised to 48 degrees. Week 2, moved fresh inventory to compromise section. He looked up. You didn't just fail to report the rats, Leo. You created the infestation. You raised the storage temperature to attract them, fed them so they'd stay, and deliberately contaminated fresh food. Carla stumbled backward, her hand over her mouth. Oh my God! That's crazy, Leo said, but his voice cracked. I was trying to fix the problem. By texting Derek Peterson for instructions? Frank held up his phone, showing the message exchange. By bringing in rotting meat tonight to recontaminate everything before the health inspection? Miguel stepped forward, his face darkening. You almost cost us our jobs. All of us. We trusted you. Danny added, his voice shaking with anger. Leo's composure finally shattered. You don't understand. Peterson offered me $50,000. $50,000. Do you know what I could do with that money? Frank sold anyway. He could have retired, bought something else. This isn't just something, Frank said, his voice dangerous and low. This is 23 years of my life. This is Carla's kids' college fund. This is Miguel's mortgage. This is Danny's grandmother's medical bills. He stepped closer to Leo. And you were going to destroy all of it for a paycheck. Leo's eyes darted around the room, looking for an escape, but Miguel and Danny had him boxed in. I have video of you feeding rats. Frank continued. Video of you contaminating fresh inventory. Text messages between you and Peterson. And this notebook documenting every step of your sabotage. He held up his phone. The police are already on their way. I called them before I came in. As if on cue, sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Leo's shoulders sagged. For a moment, he looked like he might cry. Then his expression hardened into something ugly. You can't prove Peterson was involved. That's just text messages. Could be anyone. Frank smiled coldly. Actually, the camera I installed caught audio too. Including you saying his name. 3 times. The sirens stopped outside. Red and blue lights flashed through the windows. You're fired, Frank said. And you're going to jail. 2 officers entered through the front door. Carla unlocked it, her face streaked with tears. This is him, Frank said, pointing at Leo. I have all the evidence ready. As the officers handcuffed Leo, he turned back to Frank one last time. Peterson will still come for you. He always gets what he wants. Let him try, Frank said. They led Leo away, and suddenly the shack felt enormous and quiet. Tuesday morning arrived with a gray sky and Frank's stomach in knots. The health inspector was due at 9 a.m. sharp, less than 3 hours away. Frank stood in the storage room at 6:30, surrounded by the professional cleaning crew he'd hired overnight. 5 people in hazmat suits were scrubbing every surface, removing every shelf, sanitizing every corner. The rotting meat Leo had planted was bagged and documented as evidence. The temperature controls had been reset and locked. Mr. Mitchell? The crew's supervisor, a woman named Patricia, pulled down her mask. We're finding trace evidence that someone deliberately sabotaged your cooling system. The thermostat was manually overridden and the logs deleted. Frank nodded grimly. Document everything. My lawyer will need it for the case against Derek Peterson. Peterson the developer? Patricia's eyebrows shot up. He's behind this. Leo was just the hired hand. Peterson orchestrated the whole thing. By 8 a.m., the storage room gleamed. New shelving units had been installed overnight. Frank had called in every favor he had. Fresh inventory from his suppliers sat in climate-controlled perfection, each item documented and dated. Carla arrived with coffee and bagels, her eyes still puffy from crying. I should have seen it. I should have known something was wrong with Leo. He fooled all of us, Frank said gently. That was the point. The beard really was something, though, Miguel added, setting up for the morning shift. Boss, you looked like a whole different person. Danny laughed, the first real laugh Frank had heard in weeks. Still can't believe you mopped floors in your own restaurant. That's dedication. At 8:45, a silver sedan pulled up outside. A woman in her 50s emerged carrying a clipboard and official-looking documentation. Inspector Susan Valdez. Frank met her at the door, hand extended. Inspector Valdez. Frank Mitchell, owner. Thank you for coming. She shook his hand, her expression neutral and professional. Mr. Mitchell. I understand there was an anonymous complaint filed regarding health violations. There was. And I'm happy to show you that not only are those complaints unfounded, but I can also explain exactly who filed them and why. Her eyebrows lifted slightly. That's unusual. It's been an unusual week. For the next 90 minutes, Inspector Valdez conducted the most thorough examination Frank had ever witnessed. She checked temperatures, examined food storage, swabbed surfaces, reviewed documentation, and questioned every staff member. When she reached the storage room, she paused. This is remarkably clean. Almost too clean. Frank handed her a folder. That's because we completely sanitized it yesterday after discovering deliberate sabotage by a former employee. Everything's documented here: the sabotage, the police report, the professional cleaning receipts, and the new inventory logs. Inspector Valdez read through the documents, her expression shifting from skeptical to surprised to impressed. You're telling me someone intentionally contaminated your storage to tank your business? For real estate acquisition purposes, yes. The police arrested him last night. The investigation into his employer, Derek Peterson, is ongoing. She closed the folder and looked at Frank with something resembling respect. In 20 years of health inspections, I've never seen anything like this. I hope you never do again. At 11:15 a.m., Inspector Valdez completed her report at the front counter. Carla, Miguel, Danny, and Frank stood together, holding their collective breath. Mr. Mitchell, Valdez said, signing the bottom of her form. Your facility passes inspection with flying colors. In fact, I'm marking it as one of the cleanest commercial kitchens I've inspected this quarter. She handed him the certificate. The anonymous complaint appears to have been malicious and unfounded. Frank's knees nearly buckled with relief. Thank you. However, Valdez continued, I'll be filing my own report about this situation with the city attorney's office. Fraudulent health complaints are a serious matter. I appreciate that. After she left, Carla burst into tears and hugged Frank tightly. We did it. We actually did it. You did it. Frank corrected, pulling back to look at his team. All of you? You trusted me, came when I called, and stood by this place even when everything looked hopeless. Miguel wiped his eyes. This place is family, boss. We weren't gonna let some developer destroy it. By Wednesday, news had spread through town like wildfire. The local newspaper ran the story. Local restaurant owner goes undercover, exposes sabotage plot. By Friday, it had been picked up by regional news. By the following Monday, a national news website featured Frank's story with the headline, "Small business owner's ingenious undercover operation saves his restaurant." Customers returned in droves, some apologetic, some curious, all supportive. The line stretched down the block by noon that first week. Mrs. Chen came back and ordered 2 chili dogs. "I knew something was wrong," she told Frank. "I'm glad you figured it out." The Webb family returned too. Marcus shook Frank's hand. "Takes courage to face a problem like that head on. Ethan wants a hot dog again, he says they're his favorite." By the end of the month, sales weren't just recovered, they'd surpassed previous records by 30%. Derek Peterson's attorney sent a cease and desist letter claiming defamation. Frank's attorney sent back copies of Leo's notebook, the text messages, and security footage. They never heard from Peterson again, though rumors circulated that he was under investigation by the district attorney. Frank kept the fake beard in a shadow box on his office wall with a small plaque. "Sometimes you have to become someone else to save what matters most." Carla teased him about it daily. Miguel threatened to wear it for Halloween. Danny took selfies with it during slow periods. And Frank? He stood behind his counter every morning, watching customers line up for hot dogs, and felt the weight he'd carried for weeks finally lift. 23 years. Almost lost in 2 weeks. Saved by going undercover in his own life. As he served a hot dog to a smiling kid who never heard of Leo or Peterson or any of it, Frank realized something. The best disguise hadn't been the beard or the glasses. It had been remembering why he'd built this place to begin with: one hot dog, one customer, one honest day's work at a time. And no saboteur, no developer, no amount of money could ever take that away.